Students of international relations need to understand the events and trends of the past. Theorists recognize that historical circumstances have shaped core concepts in the field, such as the state, the nation, sovereignty, power, and balance of power. It will prove difficult to understand the contemporary politics of Korea, China, and Japan, for example, without understanding how the peoples of each present-day state remember the events of World War II. In large part, the roots of the contemporary international system are found in Europe-centered Western civilization. Of course, great civilizations thrived in other parts of the world, too. India and China, among others, had extensive, vibrant civilizations long before the historical events covered here. But the European emphasis is justified because in both theory and practice, contemporary international relations is rooted in the European experience. In this chapter, we begin by looking at Europe in the period immediately preceding and following the 30 Years' War, 1600 and 1848. We then consider Europe's relationship with the rest of the world during the 19th century, and we conclude with an analysis of the major transitions during the 20th and first 2 decades of the 21st centuries. The emergence of the Westphalian system. Most international relations theorists locate the origins of the contemporary states system in Europe in 1648, the year the Treaties of Westphalia ended the 30 Years' War. These treaties marked the end of rule by religious authority in Europe, and the emergence of secular authorities. With secular authority came the principle that has provided the foundation for contemporary international relations, the notion of the territorial integrity of states, legally equal and sovereign participants in an international system. The formulation of sovereignty, a core concept in contemporary international relations, was one of the most important intellectual developments leading to the Westphalian Revolution. Much of the development of the notion is found in the writings of the French philosopher Jean Bodin 1530–96. To Bodin, sovereignty is the absolute and perpetual power vested in a commonwealth. One it resides not in an individual but in a state, thus, it is perpetual. It is the distinguishing mark of the sovereign that he cannot in any way be subject to the commands of another, for it is he who makes law for the subject, abrogates law already made, and amends obsolete law. 2. Although, ideally, sovereignty is absolute, in reality, according to Bodin, it is not without limits. Leaders are limited by divine law and natural law, all the princes on earth are subject to the laws of God and of nature. They are also limited by the type of regime, the constitutional laws of the realm, be it a monarchy, an aristocracy, or a democracy. And lastly, leaders are limited by covenants, contracts with promises to the people within the Commonwealth, and treaties with other states, though there is no supreme arbiter in relations among states. 3. Thus, Bodin provided the conceptual glue of sovereignty that would emerge with the Westphalian Agreement. The 30 Years' War devastated Europe. The war, which had begun as a religious dispute between Catholics and Protestants, ended due to mutual exhaustion and bankruptcy. Princes and mercenary armies ravaged the Central European countryside, fought frequent battles, and plundered the civilian population to secure needed supplies. The treaties that ended the conflict had 3 key impacts on the practice of international relations. First, the Treaties of Westphalia embraced the notion of sovereignty. With one stroke, virtually all the small states in Central Europe attained sovereignty. The Holy Roman Empire was dead. Monarchs, and not a supranational church, gained the authority to decide which version of Christianity was appropriate for their subjects. With the Pope and the Emperor stripped of this power, the notion of the territorial state came increasingly to be accepted as normal. Not only did the treaties legitimize territoriality and the right of states, as the sovereign, territorially contiguous principalities came to be known, to choose their own religion, but the treaties also established that states had the right to determine their own domestic policies, free from external pressure and with full jurisdiction in their own geographic space. The treaties thus introduced the principle of non-interference in the affairs of other states. Second, because the leaders of Europe's most powerful countries had seen the devastation wrought by mercenaries in war after the treaties of Westphalia, these countries sought to establish their own permanent national militaries. The growth of such forces led to increasingly centralized control, since the state had to collect taxes to pay for these militaries, and leaders assumed absolute control over the troops. The state with a national army emerged as a powerful force, its sovereignty acknowledged, and its secular base firmly established. And that state's power increased. Larger territorial units gained an advantage as armaments became more standardized and more lethal. Third, the treaties of Westphalia established a core group of states that dominated the world until the beginning of the 19th century: Austria, Russia, Prussia, England, France, and the United Provinces, the area that is now the Netherlands. Those in the West, England, France, and the United Provinces, underwent an economic revival under the aegis of liberal capitalism, whereas those in the East, Prussia and Russia, reverted to feudal practices. In the West, private enterprise was encouraged. States improved their infrastructure to facilitate commerce, and great trading companies and banks emerged. In contrast, in the East, serfs remained on the land, and economic development was stifled. Yet in both regions, states led by a monarch with absolute power dominated, with Louis XIV ruling in France, 1643 to 1715, Peter the Great in Russia, 1682 to 1725, and Frederick II in Prussia, 1740 to 86. Scottish economist Adam Smith, 1723–90, was the most important social theorist of the time. In an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations, Smith argued that the notion of a market should apply to all social orders. Individuals, laborers, owners, investors, consumers, should be permitted to pursue their own interests, unfettered by all but the most modest state regulations. According to Smith, each individual acts rationally to maximize her or his own interests. With groups of individuals pursuing their interests, economic efficiency is enhanced, and more goods and services are produced and consumed. At the aggregate level, the wealth of the state and that of the international system are similarly enhanced. What makes the system work is the so-called invisible hand of the market. When individuals pursue their rational self-interests, the system, the market, operates in a way that benefits everyone. For Smith's explication of how competing units enable market capitalism to ensure economic vitality has profoundly affected states' economic policies and political choices, which we will explore in Chapter 8. But other ideas of the period would also dramatically alter governance in subsequent centuries.